Good morning, everyone. Respected Dr. Vishujani Satigiri ma'am, Head Techidale, esteemed chairperson for the SEC CSIR committee, officiating director Dr. Naresh Kumar sir, deputy head Dr. Majumdar, seniors, colleagues, and all those distinguished guests who are also attending this session online. This is online as well as offline. And since this is a lecture on ethics and governance, so it is kind of mandatory for the whole institute to attend it so that we understand what are the major guidelines in terms of ethics and governance across CSIR. So, on behalf of CSIR NISPER, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all for this lecture and interactive session on publication ethics and research integrity. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. And I heard that there is, because of security reasons, there are some restrictions outside. I think because of president movement. So sorry in case you found that inconvenient for anything. Yeah, thank you so much. As we all know that CSR NISPER publishes 15 peer-reviewed research journals, and we are supported by a committed team of scientists, editorial board members, which is of international renown, in-house staff, and also the functional divisions like PPD and BDGI, which basically make the publication of these journals really a success every month, every quarter, every bi-month, or every biannual publications. So as we all know that scientific publication is basically evolving very rapidly, and we also have to maintain the high ethical standards, especially in era of AI, wherein it's so easy to kind of copy everything and just make it, as your own publication. So it's very, very important that we have some sessions where we have, the knowledge about the transparency and what are the responsible research practices globally. So it is very important in this context that this lecture has been organized to strengthen, or I would say to, kind of complement or augment the understanding of publication ethics, peer review practices, conflict of interest management, flag issues, policies, data transparency, and how we actually handle the research misconduct in-house, in CSIR, or outside it when we have in terms of the publication. So with that, we are really honored, ma'am, to have you this on this session. And I would now, request Dr. Naresh to felicitate you with a potted plant. No, it's okay. It's just a gesture of welcoming you, and you have spared your valuable time to come for this session. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, ma'am. So today's session is not only the valuable insights which are we are going to have from the ma'am. This is also an opportunity for the interaction among the editors and also the whole staff of CSR NISPER. So with these words, I once again welcome everyone, all participants who has joined offline, online, and we also have lots of people from CSIR, their directors, scientists, and research scholars who are joining us online. With that, I would request Dr. Naresh sir is officiating today. So I would request sir to just give some welcome remarks. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. And on behalf of CSIR NISPER, all faculty members, administration, finance, project staff, research scholar, it's my privilege to welcome Madam Dr. Vishujani ji Satigiri ji, and welcome. I think this space is well known for you, and to my understanding, and you will believe and trust that Dr. Vishujani is a well-known name in the area of this IPR, not only in CSIR but in outside CSIR also. She is an expert in this area, and she runs the whole CSIR regarding the IPR issues, related issues, and so many issues. You might be aware that nowadays there are so many issues regarding IPR, plagiarism, as Dr. Charu said, ethical issues in publication and reports, etc. So there is a need to maintain integrity and ethical standard in publications. So I would not take much time. Basically, 2-3 things, whatever I was thinking before this lecture, as yesterday I was informed by Dr. Charu. So why these type of lecture or discussion or meetings are important? Because nowadays we know that the research has increased rapidly, and the competition has also increased, and digital platform give us and have made research in a very easy manner that we can keep or copy paste from somewhere else. And there are issues of transparency of data and manipulation of data. Not only the data tax etc, we sometimes we hear or listen that some people are manipulating the figure also. So it is a very serious issues. And since the NISPER is working in this area, publication area, so I think maintaining or following the ethical issues and ethical standard in publications and research is very integral part of our research activities, not our research activities, in our behavior also. Sometimes it happens that, and we have seen that deviation from this ethical issues and standard, it is not only undesirable and not acceptable, but sometimes it makes it put us in a very big trouble due to these ethical issues or plagiarism, as Dr. Charu said, plagiarism, manipulation of data, and this giving undue advantage in the paper also. It is also comes in the ethical issues. Sometimes we are in trouble when we are not mentioning or we are not citing the research done by some others, and there are so many cases that people are facing the bad consequences also. So I understand that today's lecture is very important, and Dr. Visujan is the experts in this area. So I would request to all the faculty members, researchers, or students not to listen but to have a interactive session so that they could learn something, and all we learn from her lecture. So these 2-3 points, keeping the ethical standard, ethical issues, plagiarism, manipulation of data, transparency of data, we will listen and we will learn in detail today. And I hope that this is a session will be very interactive, and we all, not the NISPER, because I think this lecture is live streaming. So whole audience, those who are attending, participating online also, I think I request that they will benefit from this lecture. So thank you very much once again for this lecture and accepting our invitations. And we are very much thankful to you. So we must give a big applause to Dr. Madam, so that, and we are very eager, Madam, to listen from you. And I hope the session will be very interactive and useful for all of us. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naresh sir, and for coming at a very short notice and very nicely explaining and setting the context for this session. Ma'am, before we just go, she's already a very renowned scientist and leader. I just want to have few words of her introduction. Dr. Satyagiri ma'am is Scientist H and head CSIR Traditional Knowledge Digital Library or TKDL unit, which is under CSIR. TKDL is a tool for defensive protection of Indian traditional knowledge, currently the Indian system of medicine. The TKDL currently contains information of about 5.2 lakh formulations and practices from Ayurveda, Siddha, Unani, Soga, Rigpa, and Yoga. She has initiated steps for expanding the scope and user base of TKDL, and we can see that from the social media presence you have with all TKDL accolades and multiple stakeholders who are there with this TKDL. At CSIR, she had also handled matters pertaining to strategic planning, monitoring, and decision and policy insights. Prior to CSIR, ma'am was associated with the new drug discovery research at Ranbaxy Research Laboratories Limited and at Smart Analyst Private Limited, a market consultancy firm. She has led interdisciplinary teams in her various roles. And this is about ma'am, and a little brief about the SEC, which is basically the committee at CSIR level. And she is basically the chairperson for that committee. So the context is that ethics in science and governance has always been an important factor in CSIR's R&D activities. So in consideration of the rising concerns on malpractices, CSIR has put in place the guidelines for ethics in research and in governance. So mechanisms for misconduct prevention, correction, and redressal have been recommended. So the Standing Publications, Ethics and Scientific Vigilance Committee, which is shortly called as SEC, this plays an enabling advisory role in helping the organization maintain the high ethics in research and related activities. So training is an important activity being facilitated by the SEC, and I think this is one of the trainings, which is going to help us in that direction. So with that, thank you so much, ma'am. And I would now request, floor is all yours. Thank you.
Namaste to all. Thanks to Dr. Geeta Vani, Charu, and Dr. Naresh for this warm welcome and this opportunity to be in front of all of you to talk about affairs, ethics, and integrity, which I think has now become an integral part of my activity as well. Thanks to the CSAR for this, responsibility given to us. As all of you know, when we talk of ethics and integrity, it becomes a code of conduct, code of scholarly conduct for every one of us. I don't think we need to have a session like this to talk about it. Nevertheless, the rising concerns, especially what Charu mentioned, the malpractices, have made us to rethink whether whatever we have been doing is appropriate or not. And in this context, we have been having these awareness sessions periodically, just to make sure that all of us are aware that ethics and integrity are the core foundations of our research activities in the CSIR, and we continue to follow those. So let me just move forward with the presentation. Yeah, so as I mentioned, way back, I think this is the Council of Biology Editors 1990. They mentioned, although ethical principles are rarely articulated, they have been a part of science since its beginnings, and the norms of integrity, testability, and credibility have been the guideposts for the scientists. So this has been the foundation for not just research in the CSIR, but world over. And today, of course, we are not talking of ethics and integrity alone. We are also talking about scientific misconducts. And of course, both are interrelated. And as per our own CSIR guidelines, we have adapted this definition. When we talk of scientific misconduct, it's about the violation of the codes of scholarly conduct and ethical behavior in our professional research and governance. So these two are kind of interlinked, especially in the context of what we are talking about, research malpractices. And to put a stop to all the malpractices that could potentially happen in the CSIR, we have brought in the CSIR guidelines for ethics in research and governance. And of course, it's a very small document. It is there on the CSIR website. And in fact, we have requested all the labs to place a copy of the CSIR guidelines in every laboratory, every division. When I say laboratory, within the division of each of the institutions and laboratories of the CSIR, and also make it a mandatory practice that any newcomer who joins the CSIR goes through the guidelines and sign a declaration that they have read the guidelines and will abide by the guidelines. So this is the background in which we are hoping that by reading the guidelines, people become aware of the issues and would be able to practice ethics and integrity in their research. So the guidelines talks about what is scientific misconduct, what are good science practices, because it's not just about talking what is wrong. What is good also needs to be emphasized upon. And of course, we talk about gender issues, how to deal with the misconducts, what kind of reports and related documents. These are only guidelines, so whatever has not been mentioned doesn't mean that you can exercise misconduct and malpractices in that. These are guidelines that needs to be extrapolated to any research output that comes out of the laboratory and of the CSIR. We have also briefly touched upon the intellectual property, and we have talked about governance matters related to research, especially in the context of conflicts of interest that could arise. In fact, on the conflicts of interest, we have also brought out 2 declaration forms that every committee in the CSIR needs to sign, so that people are aware, the chairperson and the competent authority in the institution and the CSIR headquarters is aware that there could be a potential conflict of interest, and an appropriate call is taken by the chairperson of the committee to either exclude the member from the entire proceedings or a part of it, so that there could be no issues related to the presence of a particular person in the committee. or any other similar activity. And of course, other recommendations. It also talks about the personal introspection that we need to follow and the ethics that we need to follow. And we are also mentioning that the EMR grants and other CSIR grantees also come under the CSIR guidelines. So any activity related to the CSIR. So in this context, for NISPA, the journals that you are publishing would also come under the ambit of the CSIR guidelines. Of course, we have talked about the grievance redressal mechanism. Here, we do have mechanisms wherein, the first level is the safety officer, the ethics officer. Thereafter comes the SCC that Charu mentioned. So it is a scientific publication ethics and vigilance committee that overlooks and plays an advisory role in maintaining that the guidelines are implemented effectively in every laboratory of the CSIR. Then comes the scientific investigation board, where we call it the SIB. So if there is a complaint and it needs to be looked into, the SIB will be looking into such matters, and after a thorough examination of the matter, they will make recommendations as to whether the complaint is true and what kind of penal actions need to be provided. So in this context, we are also talking about the levels of misconduct and suggested advice on action to be taken, that is the annexure B3. And we have also mentioned about the standard operating procedure for dealing with scientific misconducts. So after the SIB, should there be still concerns, and based on the merit of the case, the complainant or the charged officer can take the matter up to the DGCSIR. And then once the merit is clearly understood, along with evidences and documents to support the representation, DGCSIR may refer the matter to an ombudsman. We have 5 ombudsmen in the CSIR, one for the biological sciences, chemical sciences, physical sciences, and engineering sciences and information sciences. And all this information related to the SEC, SIB, and as well as the ombudsman, we requested that all the laboratories place that information on their websites. For the CSIR headquarters, we have we have made a tab on the CSIR website of ethics at CSIR, and all this information is available. In fact, the list of all the ethics officers and also the SEC is put up on the CSIR website. We also talk about the whistleblowers and the protection of the concerned identity in the guidelines. Of course, acknowledgements is an important part of whatever we do. In fact, this acknowledgements also becomes an important part of your publications when authors and people who are contributed are duly given their due credit. So you must be thinking, why are we talking about all of this? We have wonderful guidelines in place, and we know what is misconduct, and we know largely about everything that relates to ethics and integrity. Then why do we need such sessions? The concern is that if you look at it, even from journals like Lancet, there are cases of misconduct that is mentioned. And here in this particular case that I had pulled up very recently, the Lancet refuses to retract the letter. So we don't know the merit of the case. I'm just trying to say that there is a stand being taken by the journals, the editors. Okay, so we need to understand why, what so. And if you look at it, the Indian Research Forum says that Scopus has delisted 108 journals into 2025, and still 30 of them are still being indexed with the same. Okay, so why are all these happening? Are the misconducts so grave that it has to be delisted, and what has prompted the Scopus to retain those journals? Okay, so this is what it is. And especially for the country, India, we've been facing a lot of backlash. Of course, China has been on the top with regards to retractions, followed by the US and India very closely. But China has been taking very strong steps to prevent malpractices from happening. In fact, they call the 5 no's of the publication, and they have been taken. These are being administered by the government of China itself. But here we have larger autonomy in the country, and we believe that when we talk of a country, our emblem says Satyameva Jayate. So we believe honesty and truth would always follow any activity that we do. But unfortunately, in science, that doesn't seem to be the case. In fact, I think after the recent issue at the Global AI Summit, they say that most of the prior private universities are having papers that have been fudged, and there are a lot of questionable research being done by them. Nevertheless, I'm not here to be judgmental about anything. I'm just trying to say that there are concerns, and the concerns need to be looked into. In fact, you look at the again India Research Watch. Earlier, we used to look at the retraction watch. Now, India has its own entity for looking at all of this. They have also published what are the fields with most retractions in India. And if you look at it, technology is what they say. I believe it should be related to ICT. Then data science, computer science, material science, medicine, neurology, biochemistry, and so on and so forth. But nothing is left out. Most of the general topics that are being covered in the CSIR R&D activities are generally covered in this list of topics that are from where the articles have been retracted. And this is not limited to only researchers. If you look at it, an editor had been removed from her post because she had herself indulged in research malpractice. And another one concern that the India Research Watch has again mentioned is that, of course, we talked about the delisting of this one. What they are saying is that it now becomes a responsibility of the researcher to identify a journal for which the publication, the manuscript could be sent. In fact, in the CSIR, most of the labs have a publication committee, and the publication committee reviews any manuscript that needs to be sent out. And at that point of time, we could have a checklist to make sure that CSIR articles are not published in predatory journals or journals which are not of great quality. And another concern is that what people have been saying is that, in fact, again from the India Research Watch, is that journals by themselves do not retract any article. Only when there is a pressure, a social media pressure these days, only then action is taken. I think that is something that we all need to be concerned about, especially from NISPA, considering that you also publish a lot of journals. And again, once malpractice is identified, of course, the blame game goes on. We have seen that even in the CSIR system, the faculty or the scientists blames the students or the postdocs, and the postdocs or the students blame the supervisor, and the blame game goes on until the SI comes into the picture, does the inquiry, and then finds who is at fault with. So this is the background. And, considering the huge number of retractions that have been happening world over. In fact, another group, I think if I remember right, this is again from Italy or Spain. This person, or maybe even US, I have forgotten where Lookman Mayhew comes from. They have now brought in the Research Integrity Risk Index. So it kind of tells that what are the it is a ratio between the number of articles that have been retracted from the journals that have also been delisted. So this ratio kind of gives you different kind of flags: red, orange, yellow, and green, and of course no risk. And again, India seems to be in the top of that list, wherein you have a lot of issues with the research integrity. And in fact, if you look at it, again, this particular graph that has been developed, it talks that the private universities are at a larger risk of having retractions compared to the public institutions. But nevertheless, if you look at the list, Jawaharlal JNTU from Hyderabad, Koneru Lakshmaya Education Foundation, Anna University, which is again a government institution, and many more are being given the red flags. So it tells that it is not just a malpractice that is existent in perhaps few research groups, but it seems to be going rampant, and CSIR needs to take cognizance of this fact and ensure that such malpractices do not happen. In fact, when we talk of the research malpractices earlier also, I'll not go into the details of it, but to say that it has absolutely no, kind of, what do you say, specificity with regards to any particular research group. you look at it, genders both are covered. Both male and female researchers have been implicated in research malpractices. And if you look at it, it is not just a highly decorated researcher has been involved. There could be postdocs, there could be students, and it comes from both public and private. And in fact, the ones that I have listed, given a yellow frame, they are Nobel Prize winners. Okay, so even they have been indulging in some kind of research malpractices. So this is to say that, unless integrity and ethics is an innate nature in you, because of whatever pressures you may feel, you may indulge in such malpractices and questionable research practices that would come to limelight at some point of time, and it would never be unnoticed. So if you look at again, I mentioned about Lancet initially. Here is an article that was published in Nature, and it got retracted within 100 days of this particular article being published. This slide says that even if in case we have the most rigorous ways of looking at reviewing articles and publishing articles, there are cases where it can go unnoticed, and then there would be such cases of retraction, bringing in a kind of I would say a black mark to the journal itself. So we need to be mindful of that. So of course it has its own challenges, but we need to be aware of such facts, and we need to see what can be done. So this is a summary of all the questionable, inappropriate research practices. It will take a little bit of time. So when we talk of the research malpractices, very often what comes to the forefront is plagiarism. Of course, we have a UGC Gazette that talks about plagiarism and says that, beyond 10% of plagiarized material, there would be appropriate penal action taken for both students and as well as the faculty members, and it goes by that order. But when we talk of research malpractice, it is not limited to only plagiarism. Today, as Charu mentioned, AI is you put in any kind of query, it gives you a lot of information, sometimes with references, sometimes without references. If you do not pay attention to it, and if you copy paste something without giving credits to the to the article from where you have referred, it would amount to plagiarism. And at times it could be a lot of false information. In fact, next Monday we're going to have an SEC lecture, online lecture by Dr. Sridevi Jade, who will be talking of AI hallucinations. Hallucinations through AI have become very rampant, and as researchers we need to be mindful of it. I'll not go into the details of it because we are looking forward to a very interactive lecture by Dr. Sridevi. So in addition to plagiarism, there are many other things like embezzlement of ideas, falsification of data, fabrication of data, fraud. And these are some things which are very, very serious. If in case you take information from some other article and copy paste that comes to, it's not merely plagiarism, it also becomes embezzlement of some ideas. As very senior members, I think many of you are also editors of many journals, you would be getting a lot of articles to review. You might pick up ideas from there and then put it in a research proposal where you would want a grant in aid project to be for your own support, or you may also look for other means of doing that kind of research. This will amount to embezzlement of ideas, so please be mindful of it. Falsification of data, fraud, and fabrication of data have been also noticed in the CSIR system. And of course, after a thorough SIB inquiry, people who have been faulted have been penalized for that. Another important thing which I will also be talking in the context of editors is that redundant or salami publications. Very often, because the number of publications, number of patent applications, the outputs of our research are counted for our own assessment and also the assessment of the students. We would want as many numbers. The numbers is what we are targeting without looking at the quality of the publications. And at times, even if it is inappropriate, we indulge in splitting the research results and publishing smaller articles. This, in essence, unless there is a clear justification and rationale as to why you have split the results, it would amount to inappropriate or malpractice, that is salami publications. There are cases wherein, I'll give you an example from, of course, drug discovery and development, because I'm more familiar with that field. So when you do a multi-center clinical trial and you publish the results, it gives you a certain amount of information and you can take a decision on that. But then, when you have multi-center trial, there are independent sites as well. So the PIs of those independent sites might also be wanting to publish their own results. That is allowed, okay? But it is not like, I do a large clinical trial where I have 4 outcomes, okay? And I split my article by each outcome. So that would amount to salami publication or redundant publication. Then comes the authorship. Yes, I think that has been a concern, especially from the students saying that, I have not been included as an author. If you look at the COPE guidelines, there's clearly a definition mentioned. There's a guidance given to you as to who can be authors. So there has to be a meaningful contribution to the research article. Then you will be an author. Whoever has kind of done things, to help publish that article can be acknowledged. So follow the COPE guidelines, it gives you clarity. Along the same lines, when we are talking of authorship, there has been also concerns of gender bias, that especially the women students and also the faculty members who have contributed to the article have not been given authorship. Please be mindful of it. Then comes the withholding of data for validation and for other purposes. Very often, we do not publish the entire information. We pick and choose. Of course, in terms of statistical analysis, there is another malpractice on the p-hacking. But here we are talking of data in its entirety. While fabrication of data and falsification of data is a research malpractice, similarly, withholding of any data is again a great malpractice. Again, an example from the drug discovery and development is when you do a clinical trial and there has been some kind of either adverse effects or even side effects mentioned, and you withhold that information from publication thinking that, oh, this will come in way of regulatory approval, this would amount to malpractice. There have been many drugs that have been withdrawn from the market because at some point of time all this will surface out and the people will get to know that something has been hidden. So we need to be mindful of the fact that if there is a negative result, it is okay to publish negative result. We don't need to hesitate, but we need to be honest in whatever are the research outputs that we have got, in research results that we have got. The output should reflect the result that has been obtained through the experimentation. Next comes the bias. I did mention about the gender bias, but then, in our country, there are many other ways, social structures do come into the picture. Those biases needs to be avoided because we are a scientific organization. We need to be honest to the cause of science. We need to be honest to the cause of the purpose of the science that we are doing. So please be mindful that there should be no bias, be it gender, race, person, or whatsoever it is. Stealing papers. In fact, this is a very strange case that has been identified. One of the very famous examples is that, of course, these days internet is having a lot of information, but I'm talking of, several years ago where we did not have the internet that we have today. So an article was published in English, and a person from one of these, the Midwest countries, I think from Iran, he copied the entire article other than for the author and the affiliation, right from the title to all the entire subject matter. He copy pasted it in his own language and published it. It was only years after they realized that exactly the same. It is not even a word different other than for the name and the affiliation. So this amounts to stealing of papers. In fact, there have been concerns expressed not just with such an example, that when you go for conferences, attend conferences, there are a lot of things besides the networking that you get to learn, okay? And there have been people who have actually copied those proceedings from the conference and published it as their own articles. This amounts to stealing of, papers. So just be mindful of it. I did talk about the p-hacking. So generally what happens is, I'll again take an example from the drug discovery and development. If in case you do any kind of animal testing, you do it with certain number of animals, say, I given an example of say 10 to 12 animals, and you collect the results of everything, you consolidate, and that is how you publish the articles. So there are, one or two ones, that deviate from it, and you want to exclude these two animals from the results and publish it, okay, so as to get that statistical significance. That is something which is incorrect. In fact, Professor Millikan, that I had mentioned as a Nobel laureate, he is known to have indulged in such malpractices. He did thousands of experiments, but he picked only a few hundreds to get to that statistical significance. So it would lead to a lot of, embarrassment at the later stage, because as I mentioned, at some point or the other, there will be a critical eye that looks at everything that has been published, and you will be faulted for any wrong result that you would have published. Another thing that has been a rising concern is that, especially coming from the younger folks, is the harking. Harking is, see, when I start my career, I come up with, a certain hypothesis. I apply for a research grant based on that hypothesis. I do the experiments, and then based on the results that I get, I go publish the article. But then there have been cases wherein people have changed the hypothesis after seeing the results. Okay, just to make sure that they are seen in the right light, thinking that they want to please their peers and the others, to say that they have been able to think about something which is very novel and which has not been expected otherwise. So this amounts to what is called as changing the hypothesis after experimentation, or what is called as harking. Then comes the expectancy effect by the experimenters. So this is again a very important case. Again, I pick an example from drug discovery and development. A classical case, a classical example of this is that a professor splits students to understand how a certain two sets of mice are reacting or responding to a stimuli in terms of their brain effects, the neurogenerative effects. And he tells a particular group, saying that, this is what it is, this is what the experiment. And he calls one particular student and he tells that, these two sets of animals are different. So I'm expecting some kind of a difference between these two animals. One is a compromised one and the other one seems to be normal mice. So promptly the students finish their experiment and come and report the results to the professor and say, the set of mice have been great. They're doing the job right. They've been able to walk through the maze and all that. And then the other set of my students, they come and say, no, this have been compromised. There is, the mice are either not walking through the maze properly, or they're hitting and stopping and all that. So there is a difference between the effects that have been seen in the two sets of mice. And then the professor all smiles and he tells them the two set of mice are the same. I just wanted to test your honesty and integrity. So the students failed miserably. So this should not be the case. You don't have to please, especially for the students. You don't need to please your supervisors when you are doing your experiments. Be honest about whatever the results are obtained. If you have some concerns, go communicate your concerns with your supervisors. They would be able to clarify. Not all results need to meet the expectations of the supervisor. Then, of course, comes the citation manipulation. I think, again, this is one of important factors that also concerns with our appraisals. We want to be shown as, somebody who has been cited multiple times. Again, if you indulge in self-citation or asking your colleague or your friend to cite your articles, whether it has relevance to the particular research article or not, amounts to a malpractice. Please do not indulge in it. Conflict of interest is again similar. Conflict of interest can be in multiple cases, including, funding and things like that. In the context of NISPR, the two important ones is that when you are an editor, you don't need to move your the articles that you receive to your friends. You choose the right expert to review the article. That would be an important aspect, especially for the editors. Then comes the fake reviews and buddy system. I did mention about the buddy system. The buddy system can also happen that as editors, you ask the authors to give you names and then you send it. You need to be careful that the authors do not give names of irrelevant people, just their friends, so that they get a good review and they are able to publish their article. Similarly, there have been cases even in the CSIR system that, somebody has created a false ID, a false email ID, and, got to become the reviewer of his own article and got the paper to be published. Later on, everything was unearthed. As I said, malpractices today might be a great thing to showcase your article, but a few months down the line, few years down the line, it would be unearthed and you will be put to great embarrassment and, of course, also penal action. Not securing permissions and authorizations, especially to copyrighted material. Just be careful, because very often, even if in case I say this betrayers of truth, that a picture that I have taken and I don't acknowledge, way from I have got this picture, and if it is a copyrighted material, I will be indulging in a research malpractice. Similarly, you have to worry about any other intellectual property rights. You should ensure that you do not infringe into other people's rights, and you have the freedom to operate. Breach of agreement, MOU, breach of privacy and data policies are again something very critical, because we have MOUs with many, interested parties. We have, especially in the context of agreements, where it is a private party, we do have certain terms and conditions. These terms and conditions are between those two entities. And in fact, there would be a clause in the agreement that we will not share any data unless both the parties agree. Please be mindful of all the clauses that have been signed with each other. Any breach of such policy, clauses or agreement would land us in great trouble, especially legal trouble. Today, even data has become very important. Similar kind of concerns exist even for the data and related matter. Free and prior informed consent, especially for biological sciences, clinical sciences, we need to make sure that we have the consent of the subjects who are, partaking in the clinical trial and so on and so forth. In the context of traditional knowledge per se, we have been interacting with Charu and telling that where oral traditional knowledge is concerned, the communities or the individuals are the custodians of the knowledge, and you need to have a prior informed consent. Along the lines of the IPR copyright agreement, statutory regulatory approvals are also very, very important. If in case there is a lab that is doing animal experiments, you need to have the ethics committee approval. Similarly, clinical trials, and of course, many other things like, PWD, CPCB, DCGI, of course, for clinical trials. Today, anything that you do with biological resources, you also need to have the approval of the National Biodiversity Authority. Please be mindful of any statutory requirement that is related to your research, and ensure that you have the relevant approvals or even whatever consent is required well before you have started your experiment, or at least initiate the process. And before you publish your results, all those approvals need to be in your hand. As I mentioned, these malpractices do not relate only to publications. It could be many other things, reports, your book articles, it could be any other, even technical reports that you publish, any outputs or even proposals that are related to the research activities need to be ensured that there are no such malpractices that are seen in such activities. So the students would say, okay, I have done so many things, but how do I know that my research is based on sound foundations? So the concern here is that I have been talking about retraction of articles, right? How do I know that what research article has been retracted? Prior to any, we start our any research, we do a lot of literature search, that's called the prior art search, and we need to make sure that the prior art search is done periodically, just to make sure that whatever we could have referred to is not an article that has been retracted concurrently or at a later date when we have already started our research. So of course, Nature and as well as the University of Oxford are bringing out some tools wherein we would be able to easily identify which are the articles that have been retracted. It's still work in progress, and there's still a lot of things to be done. Today, of course, we all use Grammarly and similar such tools for plagiarism check. But if you look at the different kind of malpractices that I have talked about, there are many other tools and frameworks that have come. Here is an image twin that talks about image duplication, figure check again, about figure duplication, and similar things. Proof AI, again, it talks about even those those charts and blot the pictures that have been put in the research articles. And we are also able to authenticate cell lines, so if in case there is any misconduct by the use of cell lines, even that can be detected today. So there is a register of misidentified cell lines as well. And of course, nucleotide region detection. If you look at paper mill detection, there are tools. Paper review manipulation, there are tools. Bibliography check, there are tools. In fact, today for AI also, if it is AI generated text content, there is a tool. Even Grammarly identifies such tools. There are many others which are available online also. So these are all different kind of tools that have been brought out to detect research misconducts. In all of this, when we talk of the CSIR guidelines and all that, of course, these periodic awareness campaigns are able to bring out certain amount of cognizance to the fact that we cannot deviate from research ethics and integrity. But we also need to look at what are the global best practices, so as to imbibe some of them to ensure that we are still walking the right path towards maintaining good ethics and integrity in our research. Just one example that I would like to give you from the Europe is they have done a survey and they have identified what are the critical needs: education and training and research integrity, supervision and mentoring, dealing with breaches of research integrity, research ethics structure, data practices and management, declaration of interest, research environment, publication and communication, and collaborative research among the research public organizations. So they have done it for medical sciences, natural sciences, social sciences, and as well as the humanities. And if you look at it, especially for the natural sciences, they have identified education and training and research integrity, dealing with the breaches of research integrity and research environment are very, very important. In fact, the one that I have highlighted in blue, adequate education and skills training at both junior and senior levels are very important. And that is what we are trying to do through the SCC platforms on the CSIR and as well as the laboratories, to ensuring that training is a continued activity and it's not a one-time activity. In addition to that, of course, they are talking of a fair and transparent assessment procedures for appointment assessments and promotions, mentoring arrangements, and of course, transparency in all other governance matters, including the inquiry of allegations. So this is largely about, what I wanted to convey with regards to the guidelines, the different aspects of the research misconducts, and what is it that we need to imbibe. It is most important that we keep aware of ourselves that we cannot indulge in research malpractice at any point of time. Should we have a concern, it's best to go discuss it with a colleague or with your higher authority, just to make sure that you are on the right path of doing your research with highest integrity and ethics, that is following code of scholarly conduct. Now I'll change gears and talk about the role of editors, because so far that I have covered is largely related to everybody as a scientist, including the editors. But when you talk of editors, they have an enhanced role, greater responsibility, because it's not just a research article that is being published. You're looking at multiple research articles that are coming to you, and to see that they are all published for the right reasons. So in terms of journal management and communications, they have an important role, right from defining the authorship criteria, competing interest, funding information, relevant acknowledgements, research ethics statements, and documenting the submission record and decisions being made. In addition, they have an important role as for maintaining relations. You have to ensure that you have a relation with your past editor, just to maintain the continuity with it. You have a role to play because you have choosing the reviewers of the manuscripts. So you need to make sure that there are no competing interests, that is a conflict of interest, and they are those reviewers are very objective in their assessment examination, and they are not providing any kind of bias towards the review of that particular article. And of course, confidentiality is very, very important. Then, of course, your larger role is towards the authors themselves, maintaining transparency, ensuring that everything is done, it meets the journal guidelines, and so on and so forth. And if there are any doubts, communicating with the authors and, providing them the comfort that your journal is still looking at it with merit, the draft that you have received, the manuscript that you have received, and due justice will be provided to the journal, the manuscript that has been given to you. Then, as a major role, you have a role towards managing review and publication. So right from the submission to the review process, ensuring that the review processes is as per the procedures and policies of that particular journal. And of course, communications, as I mentioned. And while you're doing all that, you maintain your editorial independence and you do not fall prey to any kind of conflict of interest or commercial interest at the same time. So when we talk of it, the last slide I mentioned, that training is very, very important. Okay. And there was a survey done here for the editorial staff also. So in terms of the new editorial staff, they said in a particular journal, they said 69 of them, they said yes, they have been provided training, but almost like 24% of them said no. Okay. But if you look at the editorial board members, okay, only few of them know that there are some training procedures available. Many of them are not provided. So you're not making them, aware of what are the procedures, what are the pros and cons, what are the related issues related to reviewing article or, doing the edit. Yeah, so that you have, a greater role to play, especially in imparting training as well to the editorial board members. So next slide, please. Yeah, so then there was a very, largely I've picked up articles as is and presenting to you because it's a very complex matter. And I just wanted to correct Dr. Naresh on this. I'm not an expert in any matters related to ethics and integrity. I'm also in the learning process. I think for all of us, it is an everyday learning because things that have not been, seen before are emerging, and things that we had taken for granted are now very different. So I think we, this is a continuous learning process, and I'm very glad that you gave me this opportunity to look at such matters as well. Now coming to the responsibilities of the editors. So the question that was asked is, are they rule makers or are they gatekeepers? Okay, because when we talk of a journal, we say that the journal has certain procedures, certain policies. Okay, even publishing entities have such policies and guidelines in place. So are the editors to make those rules, or are they going to be only gatekeepers for whatever is to be done? Okay, so after a lot of debate and a great analysis of it, they felt that typically when you bring out a journal, you bring out all those policies, rules, procedures, everything in place. The role of the editor largely is towards gatekeeping, making sure that those procedures, rules, and whatever guidelines are mentioned are being followed by himself, herself, and also all the associated people, be it the reviewer or the authors and any other support staff as well. So this is they conclude by saying the editor must serve as a gatekeeper for several reasons. So, okay, you are the gatekeeper. Now, how do you identify whether there is an article that has a red flag or not? Typically, whatever comes, you pass it on to the reviewer. Based on the reviewer comments, you move it forward for publication. So in the context of today, especially with the rising malpractices and retractions that are happening, there have been few red flags that have been identified. This is not complete in itself, but these are some things that we can take lead from. And the scientific red flags are lack of data transparency. So if you read an article and you find that there is some information, but that information is not sufficient in the discussion part or the conclusion being made by the authors, I think it is time that you ask for more data. So these are certain things that you should also impart to your reviewers, because you rely largely on the reviewers' comments as well. Usable data only generated in a pressing deadline. Experiments completed faster than usual. So you could look at the methods and experiments section as well. Data too good to be true or revolutionary findings. So you need to be, whenever you get an article with such kind of information, just be a little mindful. It is not to negate everything, but to be a little mindful, be a little aware, so that we do not publish anything in a hurry which needs to be retracted later. Findings cannot be replicated by others. Raw data can't be produced when requested. Research materials and protocols kept hidden. Work mostly done when no one else is around. This is more at a lab level. Misleading statistics, suspicious lab practices, small lies, big lies. So this is also applicable to the the editors. You ask some information, the author writes something. Okay, then you ask for a little more. Again, you come back. So finally, after multiple communications, you realize that the author has only been bluffing. Okay, so be very careful and mindful of the communication that you have with the authors as well. Personal behavior and toxic work environment, again, it is more from an interlab perspective. From a governance perspective is absentee leadership. If as an editor, you don't take responsibility and assign it to somebody junior, and if he or she does something which is not appropriate, the responsibility lies with you, not with the junior staff. Poor supervision and inadequate training, I think that is again very important. We often are so self-absorbed because we want to make sure that we are known for whatever we are doing. We forget that training our juniors is also as critical as making sure that we contribute to the activities that have been assigned to us. Toxic environment for both both scientific activities and for governance issues is important. Inappropriate gifts and financial arrangements, it is applicable to both the researchers, authors, and as well as the editors. Okay, somebody comes to you with a gift and they want their article to be published. They speak very high of you, say how great you are, how wonderful work that you are doing in your laboratory. It could be research, or it could be your your role as an editor. Just be mindful of it, that you do not get into such questionable practices. Workplace harassment, just be mindful of that. It could be that you are harassed, or sometimes you end up harassing because of the timelines and many other factors that contribute to it. So when it comes to the ethics from the editors, again, what they have said is about the bias largely, competing interests with the editor's own research, interpersonal biases and conflicts, power imbalance between the associate editors and the senior editors. So this, from these are all contributing. The conflict of interest, the competing interest, and the biases themselves contribute to research malpractices, editorial malpractices. Now comes the peer review practices. The questionable peer review practices would be reviewer selection, expertise, quality. Again, the bias, if you choose your friend and then, get him or her to review the article, even though they are not the experts, and you may actually have better reviewers, this would, be a questionable practice. So again, this is related to the quality and the expertise of the reviewer also. Allowing excessive delays, just because you want to support your friend or your colleague in the matter, and you allow a particular article to linger on, and be waiting, that is something which is questionable. Ignoring reviewer or associate editor's recommendations would be again a malpractice. Inadequate communication practices, neglecting the guidelines and rules and procedures. Then as a gatekeeper role, there are certain concerns that editors simultaneously serve on the editorial board of multiple journals. It depends on case to case. We need to ensure that the competing interests are taken care of. We may allow, because in certain fields you have only few people. So these, again, case to case basis, you have to take a decision, multiple affiliations leading to editorial misconduct. So again, this is something especially not so much in our CSIR system, but there could be people who are serving as visiting professor, serving in an industry, and many other roles that they have. And then, they are also the editors or associated editors. These are things that you need to be a little careful about. And if in case, like how we have a guideline and we have said that, if in case there is a malpractice, you go to the SEC, then the SIB and all that. So similarly, if in case a senior editor or associate editor has been found unethical, so you go report to the editor-in-chief. And if in case the editor-in-chief himself or herself is found unethical, go and report to the publisher. Now, we all know that the editor's role is indispensable, but if in case we are able to ensure that the editor does his or her job properly, we'll be able to ensure that, the journals have the robust procedures. And it's not just about the gatekeeping, they will now have a role even in terms of the rulemaking. So again, they have done a lot of survey, especially with the editors, in terms of many factors. It is about the awareness and use of guidelines and resources. We are talking of quality, right? So the quality comes from following the guidelines and the procedures in place. So if you look at all of this, I will not go into the details of it, but to say that based on the responses received, they say that some editors of science journals may be unaware of the many potential ethical problems that may arise. So the editors themselves are not aware that such research malpractices can occur. So what they had also done is that COPE themselves, they had looked into the publication ethics issue. So this covers the COPE forum guidelines as well as flow charts. And they looked at 20 different aspects related to the editor's role. And they say, I'm sorry. Yeah, they say that addressing language and writing quality barriers while remaining inclusive, it's an issue. Assessing contribution and co-authorship claims, assuring fair representation of new voices, data and image fabrication, cultural practices, publication practices, especially authorship, have been, a major concern. Detecting plagiarism and poor attribution standards, fraudulent submissions, and so on and so forth. All that have been mentioned in the different aspects of the publications. So based on that, they have done a heat map, and they have identified that, if you look at all of the 20 different factors that have been looked into, the one that has been, perceived as the most serious is detecting plagiarism and poor attribution standards, fraudulent submissions, data or image fabrication issues. Of course, today I did mention that you do have tools and frameworks to identify image fabrication issues and so on and so forth. But you need to bear in mind these are all to be paid. Okay, they are all only based on a payment factor. So as editors, would your journal be able to absorb the costs associated, especially when you are publishing for free? So these are things that you need to look into. Perceived as the most widespread is the language and writing quality barriers, especially many of us are not native English speakers and communicators, so the language issues still remain. There are barriers. So in the context, there are a lot of plagiarism, So how do we detect plagiarism and pure attribution standards, and recognizing and dealing with bias in reviewer comments? So again, depending on the reviewer that you have sent the article, there could be a potential bias. So this is something they are saying is very widespread and needs to be paid attention to. The factor that is perceived as most frequent when experienced is addressing language barriers. Again, issues around the way in which authors receive and respond to criticism. So, somebody might come back to you with a very nasty communication saying that you don't know, your journal doesn't know, you as an editor don't know this. This is something we don't need to react to. We just need to be mindful and respond to, in a very fair manner. Of course, plagiarism has been plaguing the entire issue of publication ethics. Respondents felt least confident in dealing with is data or image fabrication issues, fraudulent submissions, and intellectual property and copyright issues. Because when you review an article as a reviewer, when somebody sends me an article, I don't go look into all these aspects, we look at whatever has been presented, and then based on that, we make a comment whether that particular article merits a publication or not. If there are any technical questions, we only raise to that extent. But how do the authors look into all of that? I think we need to, collectively think and see whether we can bring in tools to have all these things examined, and then see what appropriate policy changes or rule making that needs to happen in the context of such malpractices. So again, there are differences between the arts, humanities, and social sciences and the science journal editors. The most, again, I will not repeat myself, but to say that when you talk of scientific articles, it is plagiarism, duplicate submission, and a conflict of interest and all that. But when you come to the arts, humanities, and social sciences, there are other different aspects in terms of the priorities or the relevance of the malpractice. So overall, when you look at it, managing authorship challenges become very important. Mediating the politics and logistics of the peer review for an editor becomes very important. And in all of this, mentoring, that is training the authors and educating new editors, become very important. So again, we all come back to the fact that training becomes very critical, awareness becomes very critical. When we talk of, all of this, we have to set standards. Rulemaking procedures, guidelines are all important, no doubt about it. But what about the standards? Today, when you talk to Charu, she'll say there are standards even for the data entry and, everything related to the ICT infrastructure. So why not the publications? So they say that we need to look at the standards for the reviewing process, blinded, non-blinded, editorial teams, transparency and traceability of the processes, the quality, which based on the comments of the reviewer, the conflict of interest of the editor, here not just the author or the reviewer, but the editor themselves, and examining the author's suggestions on possible reviewer with bias. So I talked about the fake reviewer and the buddy reviewers, right? So all this again, flows into the editorial processes. Again, reviewer, an important aspect of the reviewer is to maintain confidentiality of the information, and there should be no direct communication between the author and the reviewers. That's the primary role that the editor also needs to play. And the journal also has a role in itself by ensuring that the reviewer's permission to keep his identity confidential from the author or not. Today, there are many publishers asking whether, the reviewer's name need to be published. Okay, so it all depends on the journal policies or the publisher's policy. So here it says that in this context, in all of this, the editor himself or herself should also file a declaration of any potential conflict of interest that could be published in the article. So in addition to the two declarations that we have mentioned in the CSIR guidelines, NISPA could perhaps bring out a declaration policy for the editor themselves. Then in terms of continuing with I think I'm taking a little longer time. Hopefully I will be able to. All right. So then often the concern is that, whether the journal has been able to engage a professional editor who would be able to take care of not just the particular journal, but the subject matter of that particular journal. So there have been potential concerns about, certain of the journals that are, have taken up a humongous task and they do not have editors sufficient enough to review the articles that have been submitted to the journal. So editors are invited. So the concern then starts from there, who are you inviting, and are those editors whom you have invited, are they professional enough and relevant enough to the particular journal article? So this is what they are saying, that the journal sends requests to a number of potential handling editors in hope that one of them accepts to manage the manuscript of the journal. So here the concern is that when you don't train the editor, there could be not just the conflict of interest, but even the handling of the that particular journal, the manuscript themselves could become issues. So they say the careless handling of submissions by unprofessional editors would also jeopardize the scientific integrity of the research articles that are being published. So this is one another concern that has been expressed on the editors. Now, another concern that has been expressed in literature is that the editors publishing articles in their own journals. So is this a conflict of interest or not? Often at a superficial level, we can say, yes, it is a conflict of interest, because when I'm holding the role of an editor of my journal, I am able to push my article through because of my different connects. But then the COPE also kind of mentions that, editor can publish in his or her own journal, and this should be an exception, because in certain of these subject matters there are not too many journals to publish. So in this case, as long as you are able to have a declaration to that effect, the editors are allowed to publish in their own journal. So here we need to make sure that there is an unbiased evaluation of your research article, and you follow the guidelines like any other author. So you do not make an exception to yourself to publish in your own journal. And here, of course, editorial opinions and pieces are distinct, and we don't need to, we need to consider that. And here the editor recuses himself of the responsibility when the manuscript comes for the publication. So if we are able to take care of these, different aspects, I think we are in good place to ensure that the editors can publish in their own journals. Well, continuing with the editorial abuses, here is a particular example of one particular author saying that he had a lot of concerns because he wrote a very nice piece. I think this was more of a communication, a letter to the editor, and this he wanted it to be published. He gave a title to it, and he found that the title had, I think this is what it is, right? Yeah, just later. Yeah, the title, yes. So the title that he had given was Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome, self-plagiarism, or simple miscitation. Okay, and they changed it to Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome, simple miscitation. So he got very furious. Okay, because generally what happens is that once an article is accepted for publication, the proofreading happens. So you send the author's proof back to the author for corrections, and then you take the opinion and then finally publish. If in case you are making changes, it is important that the editor communicates why those changes are being augmented, and therefore the author should be agreeable to the changes being mentioned. So here neither none of the editor, the associated editor also communicated this change of title, and actually the author felt very concerned because without his permission, and the meaning, the title also, the meaning changed, and this was not brought to his attention. So he says this imbalance needs to be corrected, because an author cannot take a call about using his authority as an editor to publish an article without the permission of the author. So this is an editorial abuse that has been mentioned. The citation irregularities. Earlier I talked about self-citation, and as well as those guest citations, basically asking our friends and colleagues to cite our articles. I believe this has become very prominent, not just only with the reviewers, but the editors as well, where, for acceptance of a manuscript for publication, you ask the authors to cite your own articles, okay? And in fact, there are a lot of work that has been done towards this, which is a real malpractice. In fact, they have mentioned how this citation irregularities happen. They call it citation stacking as well, and how it is interlinked with not just one editor, multiple editors, multiple reviewers, and multiple authors, so that everybody gets benefited. We are not talking of democracy here. When we are publishing an article, it is about the merit of the science in it and the merit of the results that depicts the science that we are trying to say. So here we do not need to indulge in such manipulations. Of course, AI, without touching AI, no talk today would be complete. So here in a particular article, what they have done is that they have tried to use generative AI in professional editing, because AI can be used for multiple purposes. Here in this particular article, they have looked at editing using AI. So what they have done is that they have taken a particular text and then they have put it in the ChatGPT. Okay, and they have asked the ChatGPT to review and provide information. So it does something. It talks about some minor changes, and it uses a lot of this as I mentioned, AI generated text to provide that. It could be hallucination, it could be real also, but it kind of provides. And this is the first time. So what they did is that they made some changes, then they put it up again. Okay, and again they could further changes was done. Third time again they did it. Again there were changes, but in all of it, they found that the ChatGPT does not refer to any particular reference. Okay, there's no reference. It's just making some language changes, and it is adding a text which is never used before. Maybe I could use it as flowery language or something like that, just to enhance the content, but not making in-depth contribution to the content itself. Okay, so in essence, after all the study, they realized that ChatGPT is good. It can provide a supporting role, but in terms of the actual content, the editor has still a very, very important role to play to ensure that the content is connected, the flow is there, and whatever is the interpretation that has been made connects with all the rest of the matter that has been included in that particular article. So AI has its importance, but not to the extent that you can use only AI for editing. So in all of that, I have mentioned many cases of irregularities and non-ethical activities being done by the editors. So here is a particular article. Again, this is an old article from 1998. So here it talks about ethics for editors and analytical decision making process. It's not easy because an editor's role is multifarious, and there are many elements that are linked to externalities. It is not internal. So how do you do that? So in fact, I like this particular definition of ethics: doing what is right to achieve what is good. Okay, because generally we say it has to be honest, it has to be this, but here he simplifies it, and then he says that doing what is right to achieve what is good is ethics. And here there are three different things that the authors have also defined. Ethical value is a belief or principle rooted in moral behavior based on a sense of what is right. And when you talk of an unethical value, it is a belief or principle rooted in immoral or immoral behavior based on a sense of what is wrong, or at least if you're consciously disregarding it, what is right. Okay. And the non-ethical value, between the ethical and unethical, is a non-ethical value where a belief or preference that is not related to either right or wrong. So again, it comes back to the editor to make sense of what is all of this, and then use his or her own intelligence and understanding to see what needs to be done. So they have mentioned a flow chart to see how to assess issues. So they talk about identifying the issue and identifying the stakeholders along. What is the stakeholders' interest, and what would be the values that bear on those interests? Once you identify that, you also now look at values which are in conflict with each other. And based on that, you have a weighted model where you can now discount what are the things, that factors that do not matter. So you go through to those three aspects: ethical value, unethical value, and non-ethical value, and decide what contributes largely to the ethics of the subject matter, and then take a decision on it. So they identified 10 core values, and it talks about legality, honesty, privacy, quality, conflict of interest, teamwork, cultural sensitivity, social responsibility, professional growth, and advancing the profession itself. Okay, so these are the core values, and they have listed everything. And after doing everything, they still identified honesty is the most important and the most important core value as well. And then they say that, you do whatever it is, the editor's role still remains very important. And in fact, I am reminded of the sentence, unusual capability carries with it a higher responsibility. I think in the Spider-Man movie, that dialogue comes. Yes, so it is something very similar. You carry heavy responsibility on your shoulders, and especially in the context of rising concerns related to different aspects, not just of AI but many other human factors. It is very important that you are mindful. You use your editorial skills in a calm way, a very patient way, and deal with the matter, because anyway, I think dealing with the matter is most important. In fact, one of the article from our own country, it says that sometimes you are able to address certain matters related to editors' ethics by having an academy. Here we could talk of science academies, by using the academy as one of the partners for publishing articles that would be able to kind of give us some room to play with the aspects related to the unethical issues. So what they say is, seek publication in journals that are published and endorsed by prestigious national or international societies that has stood the test of time. And even the costs are covered, the contributions are covered. So when certain of these critical factors are addressed by these academies, it would become easier for the editor to ensure that there are good authors who would want to come and publish. In fact, if you look at the Australian Academy, they have been able to, Institute of Professional Editors, they have set standards for the editing practice also. I'll not go into the details. The slides are there for you. You please go through it. So, but it all talks about, the obligation to act honestly and fairly and with integrity. So the core values, that is honesty, integrity, and ethics, still remains very, very important. And in fact, coming back to the training, in fact, I found this a very nice article on ethics in scientific publication. And here, this particular gives case studies. One particular case study that I would want to touch upon is data fabrication and falsification. Sorry about the spelling mistake. And this is a manuscript has been submitted to the journal. After being sent out for peer review, one of the reviewers contacted the editor and said she had reviewed the manuscript previously for another journal. What concerned her about the manuscript was that in the submission to the journal, a time course experiment was shown in which intracellular calcium was measured by Fura2. The external solution was said to be sodium chloride in the original submission. However, the identical figure in this manuscript contains lithium chloride. So in the reviewer's original review, she made the major comment that the experiment should be rerun with lithium chloride. So now what should be done? So the questions for discussion that have been mentioned in this article is that, how would you go about checking whether or not this author actually had rerun the experiment, or has he just or she published the same experiment by just replacing the term sodium chloride with lithium chloride? How would you ensure that all the authors knew of the ethical breach if this was determined to be the case? What sanctions would you, as a member of the publications committee, suggest that these authors, if they were deemed guilty? Would your recommendation apply to all the authors or only to the one who knew about this ethical misconduct? What about the integrity of the reviewer? In order for the reviewer to remember such experimental details, it is likely that he or she retained a copy of the original confidential submission, an action contraindicated by most journals. So it has role for both the reviewer, the editor, and of course the author themselves. So this is something I felt that, such exercises can be done by NISPER within your group, maybe once in 3 months or once in 6 months. Another one is about the reviewer responsibility. So here, the journal editor sent a paper to an outside referee to review. The editor's cover letter specifically stated that if the reviewer is unable to provide a review in the time frame specified, the reviewer may ask a colleague to assist. Okay. The senior author of that manuscript, by chance, was visiting the institution of the reviewer after the paper was submitted to the journal. During her visit, she was being escorted through the laboratory of the reviewer and noticed in the reception area multiple copies of the manuscript on a coffee table. She asked her escort, a graduate student, about the papers on the table. The student says, who was unaware that she was the editor or the author of the manuscript, stated that as part of the laboratory's journal club, they do group reviews of manuscripts that the senior investigator has been asked to review. On returning to her own laboratory, she telephoned the editor with a complaint that a manuscript was circulated among her research competitors at another university. The editor in turn telephoned the reviewer, who stated that he routinely asked his laboratory to review manuscripts as a group, primarily because of the teaching value of such experience. The review group consists of graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, and junior faculty members. In general, the reviewer assembles all the comments into one review, signs the forms, and takes responsibility for the review. The reviewer felt that the procedure produces well-done reviews containing lots of constructive criticism. The questions then are, is the review group permitted according to the editor's cover letter? If the reviewer takes the responsibility by signing the forms, can he discuss the articles with his review group? Is the review valid? What should the editor do with this reviewer? Can the editor continue sending papers for review to this reviewer? So these are the things. It all depends on the journal policies. Okay, so it is not to say that certain people do allow, certain people do not allow, but these are questions to ponder. And I think NISPER has a long way to go. And I will again close it by saying that a quote from updating knowledge and skills of authors, editors, and publishers, developing and endorsing recommendations of global editorial associations, and redrafting journal instructions can be viewed as potential tools for improving ethics of academic journals. And for all of this, training awareness needs to be done repeatedly, periodically, and continuously. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
If you're okay, ma'am, we would like to take few questions.
Sure. So, sure. कोई बात नहीं.
It's okay, you can say.
That's all right.
My question is that when we talk about the copyright policy, so as a publisher, the publisher takes the copyright from the author for his manuscript. But copyright is not a single right. So as a publisher, he can only take the publication right, not the performance right, not the translation right, not the other rights. But we do not take a specific right. We just ask the author that you transfer your copyright. Is it ethical for a publishing house to take the copyright of the author by not like making him or her aware that there are other rights as well?
See,
He can retain.
I agree with you, but then the problem is that none of us actually read the fine prints. Okay, the issue is from both sides, the editor and as well as the author. We are always in a hurry to make sure, as an author, I've signed up a article. You send me a form to sign and give. I blindly sign and give because I want my article to be published. Similarly, you don't make any efforts to communicate. You could still have a communication saying that, have you seen this? Have you seen that? Just to kind of a reiteration or re-emphasis of those, those fine print, So this is on both sides. We need to be aware. Okay. I would not say it depends on the publication policies. If your publication policies already include that, okay, and authors are willing to publish it, then you are giving your rights away, right? So you are well aware, as long as it is given in black and white and the author accepts it is not unethical. But if you have not given it in fine print and you are taking away the rights, that is when the matter becomes unethical.
So again, a wonderful lecture as always. I have a question not related to the editors as such. It's related to the PhD work. For example, the academy at ACSIR, which we are also running here. Many a times it's a fundamental flaw in the system, which is like the reviewers are given by the names of reviewers are given by the not by the like the guide. So in one of the cases, what happened is when the review came, because it goes to two of the reviewers, and it was like verbatim. The review which came out was verbatim. So how is it possible? It's like, so if it is like, so yeah.
Editor to correct the situation,
Yeah.
So if that is the case, you could say that, I do not wish to get my article published for these reasons, and I'm going to communicate, today social media is a powerful platform. You could always highlight your case there. But that apart, you could always communicate, in confidence also to the editor, and you can choose a different journal. You don't have to go with the same journal. See, in the kind of work that we
No,
do
no,
in this.
it was the PhD thesis.
Oh, thesis
Talking
itself.
about thesis review. So it was much more
Oh, I know.
problematic. So therefore, because the reviewers both were at a very high stature, so you cannot like tell them
No,
that.
don't
So-
worry about
and
that. See, there
also-
is absolutely nothing. See, this is more of, to do, yeah, it is, you don't have to worry about being nice to a senior person here. It is about ethics, so
Yeah,
there
yeah.
is, so when there is a violation of ethics, there is nothing like, senior,
But,
junior and all
the thing
that.
is, the thing is, there is no way to understand, know that why it happened, because neither, let's say I'm.
No, but Director ACSAR this has to be brought to the notice of Director
It was
ACSAR.
brought to the notice and it was changed. So
Yeah, that
a
is
new
what I'm
review,
saying. Yeah, but and he
was
has to put
conducted.
in a mechanism in
Yeah.
place that such things do not recur. See, sometimes it happens that something has happened for the first time, but you need to put in a corrective action. In fact, again, going back to clinical trials, you have what is called as CAPA, that is corrective actions and preventive actions. So in this case, what could have happened in your matter would be a corrective action, but that should not happen in future, will become a preventive action that needs to be put in place by the ACSAR. So that has to be taken care of.
One thing is that flaw has to be corrected.
Yes.
That is that the reviewers' names, that should be only partial names. Few names need to be added from some,
Agreed. That has to be reviewed. See,
yeah.
even in our cases, even for recruitment of scientists and technical officers, we keep that particular list only for about 3 years max, and then it keeps on getting changed. I think this can happen even faster if it's so required, We don't need to even wait for a 3-year term or something like that. But that needs to be continuously updated. I agree. Yes, please.
Can be the actual editor. The competent authority can appoint the based on their subject expertise and all these issues.
That I would not be able to answer at all. Answer. Yeah.
That kind of concern may face.
It will have a lot of issues, right? Obviously, it is something which is a very obvious matter. So this gifting editorship should also be stopped.
Often they suffer
Yes.
and they are
Fault. Yeah.
how
No, but this is a chance that you take, right? Not very often you know that the journal itself is indulging in malpractice. Very often I'm telling you it is because of oversight and also not having the time to do the due diligence. We are in a hurry to publish our articles and we choose whatever is at that point of time we feel is best. So I think now with such cases, you talk openly, people will become more aware of such issues and will be mindful. See, the only thing that we would be able to do is be mindful. But in future, what is likely to happen is again a very different matter, We can only be a little cautious in our approaches.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, please. So I just mentioned only in the context of editing. You will get to hear more about AI in Monday's talk. I would request all of you to please join. It's online, and maybe you could, present it here in this committee room so that more people can join. You'll get to know more about the AI related matters in Monday's talk. Again, it's on ethics.
Charu?
Now, while the peer review process, then there might be major revisions,
Changes.
or there might be minor revisions or no revision that all, and paper is accepted. And now, when the paper is get complete, how to consider it? But if there is like very minor changes or no changes at all, and it's already somewhere. So is it a violation of the code?
No, I think this is preprints have always been, I mean, like, it's a mechanism that has been put in place, right? So more people get to know about yours, can also offer comments and then improve upon, say, if it is a scoping work, they improve upon, the kind of research that is to be done and all that. So they are both, factors that would, have good and bad about such things. So I think if in case there are any major changes, I think it is also incumbent on the author to say that, wherever the DOE or the preprint is mentioned, either he or she withdraws that article and then, puts a new one up, or at least add a comment that this has already been published with major changes and like that. So again, it all depends on the, policies. It could be the website policies or the journal policies. It all depends on the policies. It has to be part of it. Unless you give it in black and white, you cannot call anything unethical if in case that has not been specified otherwise. Yes. Yes, I agree. In fact, I one of my early lectures, I had also mentioned, see, you publish an article now, okay, based on whatever is the analytical infrastructure that you have, and you interpret the results and you come up to a particular conclusion. You publish your article based on that. 10 years down the line, based on the advancements of technology and all that, the same thing, when you relook, you feel that something is not right, and you go and correct that particular thing. So this is not a research malpractice. You're only correcting it based on whatever is the advancement that has happened. So, before we call anything unethical, we need to be, we need to look at it carefully, objectively, and then decide whether it is a malpractice, unethical, or it is violating ethics. So I think in the submission form, you put up all these questions, get them to respond to it. Okay. If they have violated, then you can easily reject the article.
Dr. Shiv?
That other one, yes. True, I agree.
Dr. Shiv? So the
and the substrate. So that submit that paper in on the bus.
Can I answer?
In case of conference organizations, I clearly mentioned that they are not going to bring out the conference proceeding. You can make it as a full paper and publish. That is what has been happening also.
Can I answer this?
Yes.
We have an internal committee which also looks into the special issues. Whenever you have any conference, the criteria is there has to be 30 to 40% of original work substantially changed as compared to what has been presented. Same ditto paper, whatever you have presented will not be published. There has to be some original work substantiated, 30 to 40%.
So I think this SOB may vary from institutions to institutions and
Still, see, verbatim will not be printed. That is generally with all the publisher. You may have a booklet which is on conference proceeding, having all the papers which have been presented in the conference, but that is not equivalent to what is printed in the journal. Even in case you are not, but you have presented to an audience, which is an international audience, and this paper is already out. So this cannot be published again verbatim. We do not do that. Yeah. True. Dr. Sandhya, sorry, Dr. Naresh. and then- So it's not just.
yes, and because we are giving the input to the AI, we are giving our concept or ideas on the basis of that the AI generate the content or some
So-
input. Excellent.
See, I cannot say case paper ke basis pe generate kar do, and it's flag, right? So it depends on what exactly you're doing. If it is a novel idea, you're giving a prompt to AI to generate some content on that, then also you need to cite. Then
Right, what they are
for
saying,
what is
you will be okay.
Technology that you have used so and so platform, ChatGPT, Gemini, or whatever it is, okay, and then you tell that this is what it is. As long as you are transparent, I think it is all acceptable. The only problem here with the what is the unscrutinized AI generation is the hallucinations, which has been a concern. In fact, a couple of cases that I have also recently heard is about generating references that never exist. Okay, so. So in one particular article, I believe it generated 9 references and not even a single of the 9 exist. Okay. Similarly, a case was presented in the High Court of Karnataka. So there was a case study that was generated and the advocate went on arguing about it. Something prompted the judge to think about it, and then he asked, bring me the reference. And then they realize it was all AI generated. So we need to be mindful of the fact what are the pros and cons of using AI. And as long as we are confident that the AI generated information is appropriate and correct to the research that we are doing, mention that in the methodology and then you publish your article. So AI is to be used. It's not to be neglected, but with appropriate use.
But ma'am, even when we use authenticate, the black percentage solely is not the criteria for rejecting it. Suppose you are using the flag in terms of the experiment, it may still be okay because that experiment is a standard experiment. But if it is used in results, discussions, it's a no-no. So that also, Dr. Sandhya.
It depends on the journal policies. If the editor has written to the reviewer that he cannot, that you or your, he or she, the reviewer cannot send it to anybody else, then the person cannot do that. The person cannot discuss. Maybe if you have a concern about one particular topic, you don't need to give that article. You can question somebody in your group and say that, can you find this information for me? But you can't pass on the manuscript to the junior person. In terms of training, yes, you don't need to use manuscripts that have been submitted. You can take any general manuscript and train your students. This cannot be used as a training ground if in case the journal doesn't allow that to happen.
Anybody else?
Yes, please.
Actually, there could be 3 or 4 persons who have actually contributed, and for authorship, they are eligible. But they are not in position to judge, and they have given that particulars. Then how do you?
See, you have to just go by whatever they have declared. So in today's context, many of the journals, are asking to what extent you have contributed to the article. Maybe you want to dig deeper. Again, it's a journal policy, you put in procedure in place and you ask, many people say to the discussion, to the content, to the review and all that. Okay, so it depends on that. I'll just give you one example. Recently I was shared a manuscript, asked to review it. And they said, depending on your contributions, we can include you as an author. So we and one another person, we reviewed the article completely. It is not as a reviewer, okay? It is as one of the persons helping in that particular subject matter. We reviewed the article, identified the gaps, gave inputs, okay? And we were included as authors, but with a clear mention that we have reviewed the manuscript, what role was assigned, and how did we contribute to that manuscript. So as long as the journal policies allow, we can do that. And as my advice is, follow the COPE guidelines on authorship. I think that would be the easiest.
No, sir, no. There was an OSDT paper, if you remember, more than 400 authors. So it's possible. If the ideation process involves those people, you can have those.
It depends on, so yeah.
Any other question?
See, all authors
That
need not
depends.
contribute equally. See, authors need not contribute equally, even if it is to a certain extent, but it is meaningful contribution to the article, you can include them as authors. It is only that, somebody sponsors your research, okay, and has not contributed anything other than the financial source, then you don't need to gift an authorship. Yeah, that is yes, you acknowledge those people. And similarly, there are, depending on institutions to institutions, if it is, there is a analytical setup and their role is only to do the analytical testing without contributing to the analysis of it, then you only mention them in the acknowledgement. Depending on what they have contributed, maybe they have analyzed the data and given to you, then they could be included as authors. So there are clarity provided as to who can be authors and who cannot be, but the percentages don't matter. The proportion doesn't matter as long as it is meaningful to the article. Yes. Yes, I think I have touched that upon, in many of my earlier lectures. This is not. See, in fact, even the heads of departments here in many of our CSIR labs are gifted authorship. We don't need to be very nice to this one in this context, because you will be invalidating your own research articles. If somebody forces you to retract, the whole merit of that entire research will go waste. So just be mindful of it. If in case somebody has contributed, yes, you can acknowledge your directors, you can acknowledge your heads of the departments or anybody senior, whoever it is, but you don't have to gift authorship to them.
So this practice is there. We come
Agreed.
across very big.
I once rejected a paper of an EB member. So imagine, but the point is, whenever you decline any paper, just give your justification. And believe me, when they asked me the questions, I pointed all the points and he was okay with that. So you can always do it, but with justification. So.
You can, I mean, as long as in case you feel that the article merits publication and has merit in itself, then you could give a special consideration, because this is case to case basis, and if in case, the particular student has already got a postdoc position and has to travel or any other thing, this is more on humanitarian basis. It's not to create a bias or, a special, drive to get the article published. Put it through the entire process, the reviewer will review it. The only thing is that it could be expedited. Instead of, 2 weeks, you may take about 3 days to move that forward. That is okay. Yeah, you can. So that will not come as a conflict of interest, but it is a special consideration of. See, very often you also have this special issues being brought out, right? So those are all expedited articles only. They are not with any, the routine cases. So, when we can do such things, even 1 or 2, it can happen. I don't think it is unethical, but it has to have its merit. You don't need to forcibly publish it directly, without any review and things like that. Nowadays, people are doing that. Saying that, and then you mentioned again the contributions, to what extent you have contributed, your co-author has contributed, and what has AI contributed. You need to have clarity and give it in writing. Yeah, you put it in the methodology. I think that would be easier as well.
Any questions from research scholars? Any other questions? We can have discussions later on, maybe. Research scholars, you have a question? Yeah.
You can publish it. It all depends on, how your supervisor, what your supervisor decides on that. Because every committee in the CSA, there are a group of people, and there is clear publication policies, at least, that I am aware of. As long as your master's work fits into the criteria of that, and if it is done in CSIR, the concerned supervisor can be connected with, and then you can publish the article. If it is from somewhere outside, the concerned organization would have to give you the permission.
Generally, what happens, that depends on the university also. For example, I did my PhD from DTU. Your PhD work, when start with the literature review, you can always have a review article. Maybe it's a systemic review or whatever you call it. And later, when you have your analysis after results, you can also publish as a paper. Now, the format will definitely depend on the journal where you are submitting. So that will change accordingly, but yes, you can publish. Any other question? I think they'll keep on asking, right? And you'll have to skip your lunch. Thank you so much. It's always been a mesmerizing lecture by her. I mean, she'll go into depth and she'll be so modest that I'm not an expert, but she'll be talking like an expert and she knows everything. So a big round of applause for her. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. I would now request Dr. Naresh to present a token of appreciation or gratitude, whatever we call it. That was a token of welcoming you. So this is a appreciation and the gratitude, the way you actually spared your time for us. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Now I request Dr. Majumdar, sir, to present a vote of thanks.
Thank you, madam, for such an enlightening talk and highly enjoyable. I enjoyed, and I guess everybody will agree with me in the audience that it was a very enjoyable talk. So on behalf of respected speaker, Dr. Vishwajanani Satigiri, distinguished directors of CSIR laboratories who have joined online, esteemed colleagues, scholars, research scholars and participants joining us both in person and in online. On behalf of CSIR NISPER, it is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks at the conclusion of today's insightful lecture on publication ethics and research integrity. First and foremost, we express our sincere gratitude to our distinguished speaker and respected member of the Scientific Ethics Committee of the CSIR for sharing such valuable insights on ethical standards in scholarly publication, your guidance on research integrity, peer review, conflict of interest, plagiarism, and global best practices will greatly benefit our editorial teams, staff, and the broader research community. We extend our heartfelt thanks to the directors of all the CSIR laboratories and institutes for their encouragements and for motivating their scientists, employees, and research scholars and to participate in this important session, both online and offline. Our sincere gratitude goes to the director of CSIR NISPER, Dr. Geeta Vani, for her constant guidance and support in strengthening ethical practices and promoting excellence in scientific communication. I would also like to acknowledge the dedicated efforts of our editors, associate editors, and the entire research journals team, whose commitment ensures the high quality and integrity of the 15 peer-reviewed journals published by the Institute. My appreciation also goes to our scientists, employees, project staff, and research scholars who actively participated in this lecture and interaction. A special word of thanks to the Director's Office, Administration, PME Division, and IT Division, particularly Mr. Pawan, for their seamless coordination and technical support in organizing this event successfully in both offline and online modes. We are also grateful to the canteen team and all support staff who helped make today's program comfortable and well organized. Finally, I thank all participants joining us here in the hall as well as online for your valuable time, engagement, and enthusiasm. With this, I once again extend my sincere thanks to everyone who contributed to making today's session meaningful and successful. Thank you all. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, sir. And thank you once again, ma'am. Thank you all the editors and everybody who joined. So with this, we have the closure of the session. Thank you. And I think a big thanks to Director ma'am, because she suggested to go ahead with this session. And just to ensure that we all know about it.